Since 2004, when McShin was established, we've made it part of our mission to be facing the voices of recovery and to advocate for common sense policies on how people can recover from substance use disorders. And part of that, what it looks like is, we have to reach out to politicians across political aisles and really chase them down and make sure they understand what recovery looks like from substance use disorders. Over the years, we were able to develop a wonderful relationship with our Attorney General, Mark Herring, which really goes back 8 years when he was first running for Attorney General. And as you can see, he's gone to a lot of trouble and spent a lot of time understanding solutions for addiction. And this man knows what he's talking about. He understands the recovering community. He respects it, and he listens to us. There's no substitute for real advocacy.
Hello, folks. John Shinholser here, live from the McShin Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. And we're bringing you another wonderful podcast today. Most of you know me. Those of you who don't, I'm president and founder, co-founder of the McShin Foundation. I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorders. For me, that means I've been clean and sober a little over 38 years. But enough of that. We have an extraordinarily special guest today, one I'm very proud to have on the show. And he's here to discuss the National Opioid Settlement Fund and what it means to Virginia and, of course, other states that follow. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, Attorney General of Virginia, Mark Herring. Mark, introduce yourself.
Well, hello, John. It's great to see you, and thank you so much for having me. But more importantly, thank you for everything you're doing in the recovery community and that you all have been working on the front lines for so long.
Well, thank you. Before we jump into the opioid settlement, just briefly, what's your feeling with the recovering community, the McShin Foundation, what you've seen across Virginia?
Well, you're doing amazing work, and you have really helped me better understand this issue, what it means to be battling an addiction, and hope for how you can get through it. And so I want to thank you for helping to educate me and make me a better Attorney General in working on this issue. You've allowed me to sit in a lot of recovery sessions to listen directly to those who've been impacted by this. And, I've heard from so many who are in the recovery community about how it started with them, how they came to find recovery and, their ongoing battle with addiction. And it has led to really you helping me be a better Attorney General and addressing ways that we can help and support the work that you and others are doing.
Right. And obviously you've met a lot of families in this process too, folks who have experienced the devastation associated with the opioid epidemic. So you must have a bit of a heart toward these families too.
Well, that's really what drew me and made me make a commitment to doing everything I could to make sure this doesn't happen to others. I got my start in public service as a county supervisor in local government. So my heart was always in, local communities. And so right after I was elected back in 2013 and started in 2014, the first thing I wanted to do was to travel around the state, listen to local officials. And I was just so struck by how many told me that overdoses and overdose deaths were a huge problem, a growing problem. And it seemed like nobody was listening. And then at the end of that tour, I was back home up in Northern Virginia, my part of Northern Virginia, at a meeting with a dinner with law enforcement. And a woman there came over and pulled me aside. And she told me that she and her husband had just lost their young adult daughter to a heroin overdose just a month earlier. And after talking glowingly about her daughter and the just gaping hole now in their heart because of the loss, she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, "Don't let this happen to another child in Virginia." And I made a commitment to myself right there that I would do everything I could to combat this problem. And it's been 7 years working on it.
All right, so we'll jump into these court cases. Now, just briefly, there's several different type of settlement cases out there. Just maybe name or talk about the several different ones, but the big one that you worked on that's come to Virginia.
Well, there are several. We have sued Purdue Pharma for their role in creating and prolonging this epidemic. We named some of the Sackler family members individually because they were making a lot of these decisions when they were on the board of directors of Purdue Pharma, helping to make those marketing decisions. So there's a case against Purdue Pharma. They declared bankruptcy, so a lot of the cases against Purdue got pulled into the bankruptcy up in New York, and settlement discussions are ongoing right now with that. There's another very large group of cases and really a multi-state investigation among myself and other state attorneys general into the role that distributors had in this, and then also some of the other larger manufacturers of opioids. And then, so those are like two big groups of cases right there. And then another one that just happened recently was against a company called McKinsey & Company. This was a marketing company that worked for several of the, among other companies, several of the drug manufacturers, including Purdue Pharma. And we learned that when we started investigating Purdue, there was some effort to destroy internal documentation in McKinsey. And so we have recently reached a settlement with them for their role in creating all kinds of schemes to push more prescriptions and more pills into Virginia and our communities here. And that resulted in approximately $575 million settlement nationally. Virginia alone should get about 13.6. Most of that, the majority of that, will come within about 60 days. And and real quickly, I want to be real clear about this. No amount of money is ever going to make up for the harm and the devastation that has been wrought. But it is at least one way that we can begin to hold those who I think are accountable, those who are responsible, to hold them to some accountability and get needed money to help those who are battling addiction right now.
Right. One of those cases has a what they call a public benefit company that they set up. Are you familiar with that little tussle?
Yeah, that's the Purdue Pharma one, and there's so many claims against Purdue Pharma. They can't pay them all, so that's why they filed for bankruptcy protection. And there are some people who want to turn that company and get it out of bankruptcy and have the public have an ownership stake and a control in it, and in the belief that we can generate more revenue in part by selling opioids. And I just think that is the wrong approach. I want to make sure that as Attorney General, I don't want to be owning a pharmaceutical company, let alone one that has any involvement in opioids. What I want to do is hold the people responsible for their actions and their culpability in this crisis, and then try to get as much money as I can to help those that are fighting addiction. Now, ultimately, that'll be for bankruptcy court. There are a lot of unusual rules about bankruptcy and bankruptcy law that may force me to have to agree to something that I don't think is as good as it should be. But that remains to be seen right now, and we're in ongoing discussions about that.
Yeah. Just so you know, as that discussion evolves, to the families and the victims and us, we would look at that sort of like, like you take a concentration camp in Germany and you turn it into a bed and breakfast, try to make some money off of it. So it's very insulting to us, the families and victims, to even go down that hole. If we had our way, we just blow everything up, sell all the assets, disperse the funds.
And I think that's the right approach. I don't want to have anything to do with controlling a pharmaceutical company that's selling opioids.
Very good. So now I'm trying to explain to people, look, Mark Heron, he worked his butt off bringing these funds to Virginia. So here it is. We cannot spend these funds until they go through the General Assembly and they create the abatement authority. And I want that to be the meat and potatoes of our discussion, because I know how government works. And I can only think back about the tobacco settlement and how that turned out, the previous Purdue Pharma lawsuit in 2007 and how that turned out. So I'm looking at the bill. It's before the House and the Senate, and I think it's in crossover right now. And I, as you know, I got a couple big problems with it, but all I can do is voice my problems. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that in a typical case that we bring, and the cases that we've brought on these opioids have to deal with consumer protection, because I think the people who are running these companies knew how dangerous they were. They misled people about it. They had all these marketing schemes to get doctors to prescribe more and more. And so it's a consumer protection kind of lawsuit. And normally in consumer protection cases, we try to get restitution if somebody's been ripped off. We try to get their money back for them. A lot of times, any additional recovery beyond that just goes straight into the general fund, and the General Assembly decides how to spend it. But this crisis is so severe. It is so unique. It is so has devastated so many people that I felt really strongly that as much money as possible that we get, whether it's from a settlement or a judgment, that as much money as possible go back into abating this crisis, to preventing it from happening, to helping those who are in addiction and in recovery, because we need to be doing more. And so I'm doing everything I can to make sure that money gets plowed back to where it's needed. And that's why I've asked for this legislation to be put forward. By the way, the majority leader, Charnel Herring, is carrying it on the House side. Senator George Barker is carrying it on the Senate side. And both of those passed unanimously, which doesn't happen often in this partisan world. But I'm really pleased that there seems to be an understanding that getting that money to the people who are able to deliver services is the right thing to do.
Well, you know, historically, our agencies involved with tax dollars trying to mitigate addiction in general, they haven't done their best job. And I'm a critic of that, mainly because we're in the trenches, the non-government organizations, the nonprofit, non-government organizations. Every day we're meeting and engaging these folks, and we have very, very little funding. And I'm fearful that it'll get hung up in these agencies who make it sound like and look like they're good. And as it stands for 40 years, that's the way it's been. And if you look at the charts, the addiction rate keeps going up, overdose rates keep going up. So what they're doing is not working. And I put together a special meme just for the state agency so they can know how I think. And this is kind of how I would characterize sometimes what we're getting out of these agencies. And then I put together what Dr. DuPont had to say as part of our solutions. You know, Dr. DuPont came to Richmond and did a great discussion on what's working. And our evidence, our data, it showed that 50% of outcomes are coming from non-government organizations, sober living folks, VAR, CAPRIS accredited people, and all the other non-government organizations around the state. And all these great experts say, look, man, that recovering community, Mark, you've been around the state, you watch us in action, you've seen how this thing works. I know you know about state agencies, so I'm pretty sure you can understand my fear and my concern. And I'm curious how we can address that.
Well, and I am mindful of that concern. And so here is how I'm trying to make sure that this is done differently. So I'm hopeful that as much money as possible, maybe even all of it, goes into what we're trying to set up, which is what we call an abatement authority. Not to a different state agency, but to an authority whose sole mission is to make sure that money gets pushed out to the local communities, to those who are providing services. What we're trying to do is make sure that the people who are serving on this abatement authority are not all politicians, but instead are people who are on the front lines of this. And so there is a seat at the table for representatives of the recovery community. There's a seat at the table for someone who is in the community service boards from a rural area, one from a suburban area, one from the sheriff who, as we know, unfortunately, oftentimes when they're almost a service provider by default, in a lot of cases because of they're operating the jails. And so I really want to make sure that the people who understand how services are delivered, people who are on the front lines, are making sure that they're making the decisions of where this money should be spent best. And there are some incentives to try to encourage local governments to partner up with groups such as yours and those nonprofits who are doing great work in each of their communities. Remember, I said I got my start in local government, and I've always saw local government teaming up with nonprofits in the community are really the state's service delivery partners. Sometimes the state can get money, but it needs to be pushed out to the local communities, the nonprofits and the local governments who work with them. And that's what I'm hoping this will do. And it should have a different mix of ways that the money can be spent. Certainly a lot of it, I hope, will get into the local communities. There could be some state priorities like, and we need more addiction treatment specialists. We need more peer specialists. So, some of that can go to statewide priorities, but a lot of it needs to go to those organizations that are doing the work on the ground on a shoestring budget, because that's where we get the best bang for the buck.
I just saw Honesty put a comment. Honesty says, I'd love to be on that. I'll take a seat on that board, but one seat's not enough. We should have at least a couple really authentic recovering people that know what time of day it is to be on there. And I saw Beth Macy comment, incarceration is not the answer. I would love to have access to all these jails in Virginia and bring our McShin program in there, complete with the reentry, the sober living, peer navigation. McShin, we pioneered the peer industry in Virginia long before the agencies come along and started, rigging the system, so to speak. So I know where all the skeletons are in this type of operation. And I just think it'd be everybody in everybody's best interest, they would at least listen to us. And I give you credit. You do listen to us, but at some point in time, listening's got to turn into results.
And I think this authority is a way to get a lot of results. And, as you know, there are changes made in the legislative process. So, and I'm certainly open to having greater representation from the authentic peer recovery community.
Fast learner, you picked up on. When I first saw the bill, when Brittany first sent it to me, I'll be honest with you, I read it and I went, hell yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's got the right paragraph, the right language, everything's good. But then I start double reading it, triple reading it, and I can see where legislators got up in there and started putting their landmines in there for folks like us. And I'm just, I just want to ensure that the abatement authority sounds like that's an organization we could possibly work with.
Well, I would like you to be able to do that. And so I would encourage, John, not just you, and the legislative process. You've got people you work with there, and you know how to do that. But other people who are listening and watching, make sure that you're talking to your legislators, your delegates, senators. Make sure that they hear from you about how you feel about it, about why this is important, and let them know you think there needs to be greater representation on the authority from the recovery community. And those to me, those are changes that we can work on. The biggest hurdle was really just trying to make sure that this money doesn't just go into the general fund and get spent somewhere else.
Right.
This needs to go in to help people who are battling addiction right now. And that, to me, that was the biggest and most important hurdle. I think there are things that we can do with making sure that there's good representation there.
Also, I tell my friends, I'm wired in all over the country to folks like me in their prospective state. And I try to explain to people, every state has their own issue with the money. It's got to go through their state government, and that's the time for them to go after their state people. Because once y'all come out of New York, it's up to the states how this works.
Well, it is, and there are some things that I'm working on with my colleagues to try to tighten it as much as we can, so that this money doesn't just go to the state budget and then appropriated to other things. This is a priority for Virginia. It needs to be a priority for our country. And so we are all mindful of that. And that's why I was glad to see this McKinsey settlement come in. It's the first one. Purdue and the one with the distributors and a couple of other manufacturers could be much larger. You know, their details we're still negotiating, but I'm hopeful that this is just the beginning.
You know, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a free thinker. I don't have to really drink anybody's Kool-Aid, so to speak. But if the state of Virginia wanted to like triple the value and the outcome of these incoming funds, now would be a good time to start reclassifying drugs, flip Virginia more from a criminal justice model to a healthcare model, come align a little bit more like Portugal and Oregon. And by doing that, these dollars, man, you can stretch them way out and you get a little pump effect taking place with criminal justice spending and healthcare spending. I mean, have you any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think we need to make a lot of changes in our drug policy. When I first started looking at this issue, that was my first step, was thinking, okay, we cannot repeat the same failed drug policies of the past that we did in the 90s and 80s and before, where we just criminalize it, try to arrest our way out of it. That was not going to work, and needed to address it as a public health crisis. So that was the first step. And then also trying to communicate that message to the public all across the state, make sure that people understood this is something that can happen to anyone, and we need to treat it that way. So that's the first step. But I also think there are a lot of reforms we can make in our other criminal laws. And a couple of years I came out and was like a leader in saying we need to reform our cannabis laws and not just decriminalize it, but have legal regulated adult use. And we were spending tens of millions of dollars every year on enforcement of possession of small amounts of marijuana. We were criminalizing tens of thousands of Virginians every year. And, you know, in Virginia, at least right now, a conviction like that stays with you your entire life. I'm hoping we change that too. And this year, I hope is the year to do it. So we are moving in that direction. We can be doing more too.
You know, as a recovery person, I mean, I don't drink at all. I don't smoke weed or none of that. But I think like that marijuana legislation, I think the governor's right on the money. Let's get this thing, treat it like alcohol, take the tax dollars, do your prevention, education, treatment, recovery, reduce criminal justice big time. It'll start healing these communities of color that the drug laws have crushed over. You know, our drug policies have done way more damage than the drugs have done. So I think you got a lot of like-minded people here. But back to that abatement, I don't want to lose sight of that either. You know, that abatement authority, that board of directors, they, you know, the way I read the bill, it seems to me that they can sort of demand some of those monies going to these NGOs, even if it's got to go through a CSB to write the check, so to speak, you know, but it sounded to me like it's kind of set up like that.
Well, that is the hope. And the, you know, in anytime you're dealing with money and making sure it's being spent in the right place and in the right ways, you've got a lot of people with different ideas. You've got a lot of local governments who have their own way of thinking. And so it is quite a negotiation to get to where we have gotten to right now. And so right now, some of it will go to the localities, but all of it has to go to abatement. At least that's the current plan, all of it to go to abatement, and none of it to supplant existing prevention and treatment programs. So this should be all additive, and the board has the ability to direct a large portion of that to things that they think are going to be successful. And that's the whole point, is to make sure that we have people who are on the front lines, who know what's going on, to help make sure it gets directed in the right place. And John, you or people with the knowledge that you have need to make sure that you're represented at that table. And I take seriously your insistence that you all need to have greater representation, and it's a fair point.
Yeah, well, we're shovel ready. You know, we already have a system in place. We have the capacity model with the right amount of funding, man. We can blow this thing up, and we can really solve some problems here.
You can, and also say this past year, I can only imagine how difficult this has been for you and folks in your organization, for those who are in recovery right now, those who want to be in recovery. With the pandemic, it is just taken a difficult situation and exacerbated it. So I know that you're able to take very few dollars and somehow, like, I guess sort of like It's a Wonderful Life. You put $2 in the safe and hope they multiply overnight.
Well, we're very resourceful people, and we have been open every single day, in-person visits. We've mitigated, the COVID, I think, marvelously. We didn't have our first real cases around here until about a month ago after the Christmas break. So I think McShin has done we should be teaching classes on how to run an operation 24/7, 365, and not let another illness stop you from dealing with the illness you're dealing with. So I'm really proud of our board, our staff, our community. We take people in every single day throughout all COVID. We've taken new people in. And so, I mean, we have so much evidence how valuable we are. And we're at a turning point in our history to really, blow this thing up, like I like to say. So anything you're fearful about as this bill goes through the General Assembly? You got any worries about anything?
Well, the legislative process, you've got to keep your eye on the ball and never take it off, because things can change quickly. But I would ask again, for those of you who are watching or listening, make sure you're in touch with your delegate, your state senators, and make sure that they know how important it is for you and how important it is for the state to make sure this money gets to where it's needed. That's the key. That's the key, is making sure that it goes to the organizations who are really delivering and have a proven track record, like McShin, and you do. And I know that you do have programs already in some of the jails, and anything I can do to help you expand them, because you're doing so much.
Right. What about, like, even in the recovery space, I'm sure you see this, we have a lot of different factions in the recovery space. You got prevention people, harm reduction people, treatment people, recovery people, medication people. I mean, how important is it for us to really start aligning ourselves, coming together, going downtown, speaking with one voice? I mean, I would think.
Well, that in the legislative process, that is always a good way to do it. When you're able to speak and be unified, that is always appreciated, because when people who are really on the same side of the issue but have differences of opinion on how to get to the right place, it just sometimes, and I've been in the state Senate, I was there for 8 years, so I understand sometimes it's difficult as a legislator to try to figure out, okay, they're saying one thing, they're saying another thing, they should be on the same side, but there's some differences. But if you all are able to get an understanding among all of you about the best approaches to use, that really, from the legislative standpoint, getting things through is the way to do it.
Right. Where do you think the governor is on all of this? You had conversation with him?
Yeah, we haven't spoken directly about this bill, but I know this is an issue he cares a lot about. As a physician himself, he's seen how devastating the epidemic has been, and I think I don't want to speak for him, but in my conversations with you, the takeaway I have is that he is very understanding of people who are in recovery and want to do everything he can do in order to help. So I'm cautiously optimistic. We have been keeping him and his staff informed along the way. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to get this done and get it delivered.
So how long do you think it'll be before a bill gets passed, the abatement authority is created, and the funds come in and distributions are being made?
So the current timeline is the General Assembly is meeting right now. There are a couple of weeks to go. So that's the time frame. We need to get this done and passed, before the sort of regular / special session adjourns in a couple of weeks. And then it goes to the governor. The governor can propose amendments or sign it as is. Hopefully, if there are some helpful amendments that need to be made, there's a process to make that happen. And the settlement money from the McKinsey settlement should be coming within 60 days. So that money should come in a couple of months. The abatement authority hopefully will be up and going by the 1st of July, and money can get in and then start getting distributed out as quickly as possible.
Now, you said the governor can amend things, right? Make amendments. Does that mean it's got to go back to the House and Senate for approval, or can he do it on the spot?
Well, the process is if the governor makes an amendment, it needs to go back to the House and Senate during what's called the veto session. That typically in early April. So the time frame is it will happen pretty quickly, and I'm cautiously optimistic. Decisions about how to distribute this money can begin to be made in the summer.
Yeah, I saw Beth Macy made a comment about MAT, buprenorphine, harm reduction, needle exchange, and my thinking is that this abatement money can absolutely help mitigate all those challenges and those needs. And I think it's a big picture item.
It is, and all of the things that you mentioned to me fit within what the authority would be able to spend money on. And it also, we also know there are a lot of times there are co-occurring dependencies, the co-occurring mental health issues. It's broad enough that it can include helping in those areas as well. So it's really important to make sure that we have the right people on that authority.
See, you just hit something real important, because the department is famous for taking substance abuse money and spending it more on mental illness. And we always seem to be, the run of the litter, and that authority, I'm telling you, that's where you want that recovery voice. I'm not sure one person's enough people on that authority. You might need a couple people on that.
John, you're very persuasive.
I mean, that's how you get things done.
Yeah. So I think those are some changes that we can talk about and try and get incorporated as the legislation makes its way through the process. So right now, each chamber has passed a slightly different version, but very similar version, both unanimously. They go to they swap chambers now. And, I think this is probably the best time to try to reach an agreement on exactly how large this board should be and who the representatives should be on.
Yeah, I think shouldn't it be published somewhere where each state can see how much money they're getting? That's got to be public knowledge, I would think.
Yes, and so in terms of the settlement with McKinsey and how that was distributed among the states, earlier, I want to say it was last year or maybe even the year before, as negotiations in the multi-state investigation dealing with the distributors and some of the manufacturers began to go from the idea stage to putting pen to paper. The AGs had a meeting. We talked about different ways to distribute the money. Some said it should be based on population. Some said it should be based on states that were hardest hit. And so it was a negotiation among the states to try to balance all of those things out. And it seems like we were able to reach an agreement. And then when we were able to get this settlement with McKinsey, we went with that same formula that we had worked on before.
This must have been a colossal project for all 50 state attorney generals. I just can't imagine you guys coming together. I can't imagine would it be like a Zoom call? All 50 of y'all been on there?
It could. Yeah, that would have been a little bit easier back then. So this multi-state investigation has been a lot of work for a lot of us who've been working on this for years. And as attorneys general, usually it'll be a group that takes the lead and depending upon expertise they have and bandwidth and everything else. But this was so large among the state AGs, we divided up the work. So we are on the executive committee in the Teva case, for example, which we filed here in Richmond, and some other areas that I've really kind of staked out an important role. But other AGs have done other pieces of it. So we sort of divided up the workload because it was so large. And now that you're talking about one of the specific pieces of it that I think is really, really important. I mentioned no amount of money is ever going to make up for the harm that was done. But this is a way to hold some people responsible who we think are especially culpable. But one of the things that I thought was really, really important, it was through listening to people who have been directly impacted. The recovery community and meetings that I've been in, with you and others, talking to people who've lost a loved one, a brother, a sister, a friend, a son or a daughter, and they really want to make sure that people know how this happened and who was responsible for it. And so for me, carrying their message, I want to make sure that there's as much transparency as possible. And one of the things that I made a mission was that the internal documents from these companies that we've been able to discover, I want to have placed in a permanent database that is open to the public, and anybody who wants to do it can look and see for themselves, because these are civil cases. These are civil cases. And usually when you settle a civil case, there's usually a paragraph of boilerplate language that says, we don't admit any wrongdoing. This is just a compromise of a disputed matter. And I felt, if we're not going to get an admission from the people who did this, at a minimum, we need to insist on those internal documents being publicly available forever. So journalists, historians, or anybody who's lost a loved one, if they want to, they can see the documents themselves. They can see the names of the people in the marketing offices, the people who knew the truth about these drugs and still kept trying to come up with schemes to sell more. That's a key part of it. And that so far, that seems to have taken hold, and I think will be a part of any settlement. It's a part of the McKinsey settlement, and I think it will be a part of any future one with anybody else.
Right. So moving forward, what can the recovering community across Virginia expect out of you, their Attorney General, when it comes to what this might all unroll out and look like? I mean, you're going to continue to be our champion. You're going to, I know you're accessible because you're on this podcast. What's that going to look like?
Yeah, well, I started off by talking about how the recovery community has taught me so much about addiction and how people can have hope and work their way through it to a successful future. I need to continue to rely on you to help make me do my job better. And I'm hearing you loud and clear that you think more representation needs to be from the recovery community on this group. But what folks can always count on me is I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can to, first of all, stop the lies and make sure that these drug companies stop lying about their drugs. Second, to hold those responsible accountable to the extent I'm able to. Third, to bring back as much money and resources as I can. And fourth, to make sure that that money goes to the people who are out on the front lines, abating this crisis, helping those who are in recovery, and doing prevention work. Those are the things that everybody who's listening on this can always count on me. And then lastly, you can always count on me to listen to what you have to say. And every time I talk with you, you seem like you're right. So I should just listen to what you say and do it.
Well, I know where you work at, and I ain't scared to go down there and picket your front door. However, I got to give you credit for, being engaging and involving. And I hope and pray that as we walk through the process, a year from now, McShin and these other NGOs aren't, just here we are busting our butts, doing a lion's share. And these agencies are blocking us, putting barriers up, inventing stuff they don't need to invent. More of the same in that area would really be a disheartening experience for us. So I'm really leaning on your office to make sure that doesn't happen.
And I'm hearing you, and wherever I can cut some red tape, I will try to help you.
I'm gonna bring the scissors because I know. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on today, sharing all this with us. Just keep doing what you're doing, I guess. Yeah, well, thank you, and I look forward to coming back to McShin. I miss seeing you. This COVID has really made us all a lot more isolated than we have been, but it's really good to have this opportunity to have a conversation. Can't wait to get back and see everybody, and thank you for all that you're doing for folks who are in addiction and recovery. Very good. Well, thanks so much, and more will be revealed, gang. Y'all have a good weekend. See you later. Thank you.
My name is Shannon Lance. I'm currently here in recovery at McShin Foundation. I got out of jail on January 10th, 2021, and while I was incarcerated there, my mother passed away due to COVID complications on December 14th. It was a really challenging event in my life. While I was incarcerated there, I watched the recovery videos and the podcast on the tablets there, that was made by the McShin Foundation. Getting to Heard podcast really made me feel like I was a part of something on the outside, because, there's people that are commenting and just seeing, people that I was incarcerated with on the videos, and just thinking, man, that's going to be me, before too long. And, I'm going to be sitting there in them rooms and, be able to be a part of the podcast and get in the Heard series. And, now I'm a part of the Heard here at McShin, and it's an amazing feeling, and it's nice having a fulfilled sense of hope in my life currently, and just to live one day at a time, and just to have positive feelings in my life and good relationships with my family and friends is an amazing event.